I never imagined that one day my own daughter would pretend not to know me. And yet, here I am, sitting in the dim morning light of my modest living room, sipping lukewarm coffee, thinking about the child I held in my arms for the first time 71 years ago. Emily. My Emily. She was tiny then, so fragile that the hospital nurse practically had to warn me not to squeeze too hard. I remember the weight of her in my arms, the softness of her skin, the faint, perfect smell of a newborn, all of it imprinting itself on my memory like sunlight on a window pane. Her mother, Helen, had been radiant, smiling with that quiet, unwavering confidence I adored. She had been the center of my life, the one who taught me that love doesn't count the cost. It just gives, endlessly, without thought of reward. Helen passed away when Emily was just 10. Cancer, swift and merciless. I still remember the night she went, holding her hand, feeling her warmth fade, and wondering how I would explain to our daughter that life could be so cruel. But we carried on. I carried on. I became father and mother, both, scraping together what little we had to make sure Emily never went without. Those years shaped me. My hands, roughened by work, were never idle. I repaired the old house we had bought when we first married, painted the walls myself, and fixed every squeaky floorboard. Every nail I hammered, every coat of paint I brushed was a promise to Emily I would always be here. She grew up running through these rooms, the echo of her laughter a balm to my grief, a reason to keep going. I taught her to ride a bike in the front yard, her tiny hands gripping mine as we wobbled along the gravel path. I taught her how to cook scrambled eggs on Sunday mornings and how to fold laundry just right so that each shirt could be worn with dignity. And I taught her, most importantly, how to love without measure. We didn't have much. There was no fancy furniture, no summer trips abroad, no parties thrown to impress neighbors. But what we had was rich. Stories told under the stars, hands held in the dark, and a bond that felt unbreakable. I swore to myself that no matter what, I would make sure Emily never felt poor in love, in care, or in memory. And yet, here I sit now, over 40 years later, knowing that love is not always enough to protect you from the cruelty of the world or the ambition of those you cherish most. Emily has grown into a woman of remarkable beauty, charm, and intelligence. I'm proud of the person she has become. But pride is a strange thing. It sits alongside fear. And fear has been whispering in my ear ever since she announced her engagement to the Preston family. The Prestons are wealthy beyond imagination, a family that measures life in numbers, luxury, and appearances. Their mansion overlooks the town, glimmering like a palace of ice and gold. They hold soirees with crystal chandeliers, waiters in crisp white jackets, and gifts that cost more than I earned in a decade. And my daughter, my Emily, has been swept into this world with a kind of fervor that both delights and terrifies me. I remember the day she first mentioned it. She called me into her room, her eyes sparkling like she had just discovered the moon. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling slightly, a mixture of excitement and nerves, "I'm getting married." I smiled, already feeling the pull of excitement in her voice. "That's wonderful, Emily. Tell me about him." And she did, a dazzling portrait of wealth, charm, and social prominence. She described his family, their lavish home, and the parties they attended. And while I nodded and smiled, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. This was a world I had never known, and it was pulling my daughter further from the humble, grounded life we had built together. But I was determined not to let fear dictate our relationship. I reminded myself of what Helen would have said. Love is stronger than wealth. It survives everything if it is true. So I promised Emily that I would support her, not just with words, but with all the love, patience, and wisdom I had gathered over 70 years. I told her, "Go and explore this life, Emily. I trust you to carry our family's heart with you." And I meant it. Little did I know, the true test of that heart would come not in years of hardship or illness, but in a single, dazzling, terrifying day. The day she stood before friends and strangers in a gown that could blind the sun and pretended not to know me at her own wedding. The day Emily announced her engagement is still etched in my memory with the clarity of sunlight through a window pane. I had been fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen when she appeared, radiant in her simple floral dress, clutching an envelope with the care of someone holding a treasure. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling slightly, a mixture of excitement and nerves, "I'm getting married." For a moment I couldn't speak. My hands, rough from decades of work, gripped the wrench tighter than necessary. A flood of emotions washed over me: joy, pride, and a small, unignorable pang of fear. I had always imagined this day in soft focus, Emily smiling at me before walking down the aisle, whispering thanks for all the love I had poured into her life. But there was something in the way she said it, a subtle greatness in her eyes that hinted the world she was stepping into wasn't ours. "Tell me everything," I said, finally, setting the wrench aside and pulling her onto the kitchen stool beside me. And she did. Nathan Preston, son of the Prestons, the family whose name was whispered across town with admiration and envy. Their wealth was legendary, the kind it could buy a house in our neighborhood 10 times over and still have gold left for the gates. And my daughter, my Emily, has been swept into this world with a kind of fervor that both delights and terrifies me. That night, after she had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the dim light of the single lamp. I traced the outlines of the worn wood with my fingers, thinking of all the nights Helen and I had spent here teaching her to stir a pot, to measure a cup, to fold her heart into small acts of love. Could these lessons survive in the shadow of wealth, prestige, and ambition? I told myself I trusted her judgment. I told myself I could navigate whatever lay ahead. But there was a tension in the air that I could not name, the feeling that something precious could slip through my fingers despite my best efforts. The next weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, introductions, and subtle hints of the Prestons' world. Emily invited me to meet Nathan's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Preston, in their lavish home. I remember stepping inside for the first time, feeling the chill of polished marble under my worn shoes, the glare of crystal chandeliers, and the quiet hum of air conditioning that seemed louder than any human voice. The house was magnificent, but sterile. It smelled faintly of perfume and polish, not of home or warmth. Mr. Preston greeted me with a firm handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thomas," he said smoothly, "so pleased to meet you. Emily tells us so much about you, your dedication." He gestured vaguely toward my hands. "Carpentry, yes? How quaint." I nodded politely. There was no anger in me, only calm observation. Wealth and refinement could never substitute for love, and I had long learned to recognize the hollowness behind smiles like his. Mrs. Preston, meanwhile, inspected me as if I were a rare insect in a display case. Her polite smile was courteous but distant. "Emily chose well," she said. "It's admirable what you've done for her." The tone implied that admiration alone was insufficient. I held my tongue. I had always known that wealth and privilege were not a measure of heart, and I had always known that to challenge it would be pointless. My daughter's happiness came first, always. As the weeks passed, I watched Emily transform, caught between the life we had built and the glittering world she was entering. I noticed the small changes first, the way she mentioned clothes and appearances more often, the way she lingered on descriptions of Nathan's family wealth. I noticed how her laughter at their parties seemed slightly forced and yet eager to belong. Still, I told myself it was all part of growing up. She was stepping into a new chapter of her life, one I could guide gently but not control. I worked quietly on a gift for her wedding, something that carried the weight of our family's love, something she would understand one day. It was a small, carved wooden box made from the oak that had held our family together for decades. Inside, a letter, a memory, and, unseen by anyone else, a clause that ensured Emily would never forget the value of home and family, even if she tried. But I could not predict the wedding day. I could not predict the moment she would step before her guests. After the initial shock of the engagement wore off, I found myself retreating to my workshop more often than usual. The small space behind our house had always been my sanctuary, a place where time slowed and my hands could do the speaking that my heart sometimes struggled with. Tools lined the walls like old friends, hammers with worn handles, chisels with nicked edges, planes that still smelled faintly of oak and sawdust. I had always built things with care, whether it was a chair that would hold generations of children, a table that bore the weight of family dinners, or the tiny trinkets Helen and I made for special occasions. And now I wanted to create something for Emily, something that would speak of home, of love, and of the life she was leaving behind in her haste to step into another world. I searched through the workshop until I found the perfect piece of oak. It had been part of the old living room floor when Helen and I first moved in. The grain was strong, the color warm, and the edges had softened over decades of footfalls and memories. To me, it wasn't just wood. It was a fragment of our life together, a witness to the laughter, the tears, and the countless Sunday afternoons spent teaching Emily to fold laundry, stir a pot, or pedal her bike around the gravel path. I began by sketching the design carefully on paper. A small, elegant box, simple in appearance but layered with meaning. I would carve the lid with a quote Helen had loved. Family is not measured by wealth, but by the love that holds it together. For days, I worked in quiet concentration. The first cuts were slow, deliberate, each pass of the chisel removing a thin sliver of wood, revealing the story hidden beneath. The smell of fresh oak filled the room, mingling with the faint perfume of Helen's old scarf tucked into a drawer. I paused often, not out of fatigue, but to remember. I remembered Emily as a child, her small hands clumsy around a paintbrush, her laughter spilling over the yard like sunlight. I remembered the day she scraped her knee, and I bandaged her up, telling her that even broken things could heal if treated with care. I carved a hidden compartment into the bottom of the box, a small, almost imperceptible slot that would hold a photograph of Emily as a child, standing in front of the house we had built together, with me smiling beside her. Beneath the photo, I would place a folded letter. It was a quiet lesson, one she might not notice immediately, but one that would carry the weight of years of love, sacrifice, and guidance. Every evening, I would sit by the window, sanding the edges and imagining her face when she finally opened it. Would she laugh? Would she roll her eyes at my old-fashioned handiwork? Perhaps. But more than that, I hoped she would understand the heart behind it, that the value of a gift lies not in its price, but in the love it carries. As I worked, I reflected on the life we had shared. Helen's absence still left a quiet ache, a soft echo in every corner of the house. But it was her teachings that guided me now. She had always said, "Thomas, when we give something of ourselves, we leave a piece of our soul in it, and that is the greatest inheritance anyone can receive." I clung to that wisdom with the same intensity I had held Emily as a baby, praying that it would reach her even through the veneer of wealth and sophistication she now sought. By the time the box was finished, it was more than a gift. It was a symbol, Every curve, every smooth edge, every carefully carved letter spoke of decades of devotion. I lined the interior with soft velvet, a tactile reminder of comfort and care. And in that hidden compartment, the photograph and letter waited, quietly carrying the message I hoped Emily would one day understand, that love, history, and family are not things that can be bought, only nurtured and remembered. I placed the finished box on my workbench and stepped back. The workshop was quiet, except for the faint hum of the evening breeze through the open window. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the little treasure I had made. It didn't matter. This was for Emily, and one day she would know. And perhaps, I thought, as I cleaned my tools, this gift would serve as a gentle reminder that no amount of luxury, no matter how dazzling, could ever replace the years of love, guidance, and care that had shaped her. The evening of the rehearsal dinner arrived like a storm I had been bracing for in silence. The Prestons' mansion glimmered against the night sky, a fortress of wealth and opulence that seemed to mock my worn shoes and threadbare jacket. I adjusted my collar, smoothed my gray hair, and tried to ignore the creeping anxiety that had taken root in my chest. Emily greeted me at the door, radiant in a gown that shimmered like sunlight on water. She kissed my cheek quickly, a fleeting gesture, and whispered, "Thank you for coming, Dad." Her eyes flicked briefly toward her in-laws, and I knew immediately the world she had chosen would not allow her to linger in mine. The foyer was vast, its marble floors reflecting the chandeliers overhead, crystal dripping like frozen waterfalls. Guests arrived in waves, their laughter tinkling like fine glass, each greeting more formal, more rehearsed than the last. Waiters moved silently, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked like art. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the one that had been there ever since she announced her engagement. Mr. Preston appeared, tall and impeccably dressed, his smile polished, his handshake firm. "Thomas," he said smoothly, "we're so pleased to meet you. Emily has told us so much about you. Your dedication." His eyes flicked toward my hands. "Carpentry, yes? How quaint." I nodded politely, forcing a calm that was a thin veneer over my nerves. There was no anger, only observation. This was their world, and it was not mine. Still, I reminded myself, Emily was here. She was the reason I stood through the whispers and the judging glances. Her mother, Mrs. Preston, offered a polite smile, her eyes lingering briefly over my worn jacket. "You've done well raising her," she said softly, though there was a subtle implication that well might not be enough. "It's admirable. Admirable." That word, so carefully chosen, hung in the air like a damper. I accepted it with the dignity I had cultivated over decades. I was not here to compete with wealth or status. I was here to witness my daughter's happiness. The dinner began, and the table was a masterpiece of indulgence. Crystal glasses sparkled, silverware gleamed, and the plates of food seemed to have been prepared by chefs whose names I could never pronounce. Emily sat beside Nathan, her hand tucked lightly into his, her eyes bright, her laughter delicate yet precise, the kind that pleased the wealthy and measured alike. I, on the other hand, sat quietly, my gift resting beside me. The small carved wooden box looked almost comical against the backdrop of diamond jewelry and gold pens. I had chosen simplicity over spectacle, substance over appearance. My heart thumped with the knowledge that the true value of this gift was invisible to most, hidden in a compartment that no one would see until the time was right. Conversation swirled around me, a mix of polite chatter and subtle jabs. One guest, a young woman in a sparkling dress, whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Is that her father? How quaint." Another laughed softly, a hint of condescension in her tone. Emily shifted uneasily, but said nothing. I smiled inwardly. I had long since learned that the world's judgment could not touch the bond I shared with my daughter. What they saw as quaint, I saw as priceless. Decades of care, love, and sacrifice carved into every fiber of my being. During the toast, Nathan's father raised his glass, extolling the virtues of wealth, opportunity, and social prominence. I listened quietly, letting his words wash over me. They were important to him, and I respected that. But I knew a different kind of richness, the kind built with hands, heart, and memory. As the evening wound down, Emily's eyes found me across the table. For a brief moment there was a flicker of recognition, a spark that reminded me of the little girl who once clung to my hand on the gravel path outside our old house. But just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by the polite distance she now maintained in the presence of her new world. I left the dinner with a quiet resolve. My gift, small and unassuming, was ready. The wedding day would come, and with it the moment when Emily's understanding of love, loyalty, and family would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. I walked home through the cool night air. The quiet of my small town contrasted sharply with the opulence I had just witnessed. My mind lingered on the box, the hidden compartment, the photograph and letter tucked carefully inside. Emily may not see its value now, but one day she would know. And perhaps, I thought, as I cleaned my tools, this gift would serve as a gentle reminder that no amount of luxury, no matter. The morning of the wedding arrived crisp and bright, though the sunlight did little to warm the pit growing in my stomach. I dressed slowly, carefully. My best jacket, neatly pressed shirt, polished shoes that had seen far better days but were cleaned with devotion. I adjusted my tie in the mirror, my hands trembling slightly, not from age, but from a mixture of anticipation and dread. Emily appeared in the doorway, radiant, her gown cascading like liquid cream. She smiled, briefly touching my arm. "Dad, thank you for being here," she whispered. Her voice carried the same warmth I remembered from childhood, yet it was tempered now by a careful polish, a subtle distance I could not ignore. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Always, Emily. You know that." The drive to the venue was quiet. I watched the familiar streets pass by. The old grocery store, the park where she had learned to ride her bike, the little bakery where we had celebrated countless birthdays. Each landmark stirred a memory, each memory a reminder of the life we had shared. And yet, as we approached the gates of the Prestons' estate, I felt those memories slipping behind a wall of marble and steel. The mansion loomed ahead, dazzling and intimidating. The valet took the car, and I walked up the grand steps, the echo of my shoes, a reminder that I did not belong here, at least not in the eyes of the world Emily had chosen. Inside, the air was perfumed with wealth, polished marble, fresh flowers imported from another continent, and the faint, inescapable aroma of luxury. Guests moved gracefully, their laughter rehearsed, their smiles perfectly timed. I held my head high, gripping the small wooden box under my arm like a shield, like a reminder that I carried a piece of our family's heart into this glittering battlefield. Emily greeted her bridesmaids, adjusting their dresses, chatting about floral arrangements and the seating chart. Nathan hovered nearby, charming, confident, clearly at home in a world I could only observe from the edges. And then it happened. As the ceremony began, Emily walked down the aisle, radiant, poised, and for a fleeting moment our eyes met. I smiled, a warm, fatherly smile, expecting a glance of recognition, perhaps even affection, but it never came. She smiled politely, then looked away, ignoring me completely in front of her guests. I froze, the wooden box tight in my hands. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. I could hear the whisper of silk and soft gasps from the crowd. I could see the brief flicker of confusion and surprise on some faces, quickly replaced by the polite smiles of those who had rehearsed their expressions in advance. For a moment I considered speaking, calling her name, reminding her of the little girl she had been. But I knew it would mean nothing. The world she had entered demanded appearances, perfection, and social polish. The little gestures of love and devotion that had defined our life together were invisible here. So I remained still, a quiet observer, my chest tightening with every step she took down the aisle. And yet, beneath the sting of betrayal, there was a deeper, steadier feeling. The certainty that the gift I carried, the one no one else would notice, held a lesson that could not be ignored, no matter how dazzling the surroundings. The ceremony continued, the vows exchanged in voices that rang with sincerity and pretense alike. I watched Emily laugh politely at Nathan's jokes, adjusting to the world she had chosen. I watched the in-laws beam, satisfied, triumphant in their ability to shape and control the narrative of their social image. And I held the box tighter, knowing that one day the price of their luxury would come due, and the truth, carried quietly, in wood and memory, would remind them all of what truly mattered. By the time the ceremony ended and the applause echoed through the marble hall, I had made a silent vow. I would not falter. I would remain present, steady, and patient. The lesson embedded in my gift would speak louder than any whispers, any laughter, any social snub. And when the moment came, when the $500,000 truth revealed itself, Emily would finally understand. Until then, I watched, quietly, as my own daughter stepped into a world that had no place for the father who had raised her, and I held hope that love, patience, and careful planning would bridge the distance she had created. The reception hall glittered like a palace, each chandelier refracting the warm light into 1,000 dancing prisms. Waiters moved silently among the guests, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that seemed more like artworks than food. Crystal glasses chimed gently in toasts, and the hum of polite conversation filled the air with a rhythm that was almost musical and almost suffocating. I walked slowly along the perimeter, keeping my small carved wooden box close to my chest. Every eye in the room seemed to follow me, though most looked with polite curiosity, some with thinly veiled judgment. The Prestons' world was precise, rehearsed, and unforgiving to those who did not belong, and I felt its weight with every step. Emily floated among her guests, radiant, graceful, and seemingly untouched by the whispers I could hear just beneath the polite laughter. I watched her interact with Nathan's family, her movements careful, her laughter measured. She was a bride who had mastered the art of perfection. But perfection came at a cost, and tonight that cost was her acknowledgement of the man who had given her everything, me. A group of young socialites approached, whispering and glancing at my simple jacket. "Is that her father?" one asked with an incredulous tilt of her head. "How quaint." I smiled politely. "Yes," I said simply, "that's me." The words seemed to amuse them. Emily shifted slightly as if she wanted to shrink from my presence, and for a moment I felt the sting of rejection as sharply as the day she first ignored me walking down the aisle. I reminded myself to stay calm, to remain patient, to remember why I had brought the gift. The carved box, simple yet filled with hidden meaning, was my bridge back to her, the message that no wealth, no social expectation could erase the foundation of love and sacrifice upon which her life had been built. The box, small and unassuming, carried the weight of a father's life, waiting for the moment when its lesson would be discovered. That moment, I knew, would come, and when it did,
Emily would see clearly what she had overlooked in her rush toward luxury, that love, patience, and quiet resilience endure far longer than wealth and social image. And I would be there, steady and calm, to witness her realization, the moment when the price of luxury would finally come due.
The night wore on, and the reception hall was alive with laughter, music, and the rhythmic clink of glasses. I drifted quietly along the edges, observing, listening, and holding the small carved box close to me. Each time Emily passed by, her smile remained carefully measured, flawless, yet distant. She was radiant, yes, but she had forgotten, even if only for a moment, the man who had shaped the life she now flaunted before these strangers. Nathan Preston was a picture of charm, effortlessly blending his confidence with ease. He greeted guests, orchestrated conversations, and projected the perfect image of a wealthy, loving fiancé. I watched him closely, noting the precise calculations behind every gesture, the smiles that were practiced, the laughter that was measured. I felt a quiet sense of both amusement and concern. For all their refinement, there was a hollow perfection here that money could buy, but love could not. At one point, Emily approached me, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. "Dad, do you want some champagne?" she asked, her tone polite but faintly distant. I shook my head, smiling gently. "No, thank you. I prefer the quiet tonight." She nodded and walked away, leaving me with the box. I opened it slowly, running my fingers over the engraved quote, the velvet lining, the hidden compartment. Everything was intact, exactly as I had designed it. The photograph tucked inside, the folded letter beneath, patiently waiting for the day it would be discovered. I caught a few glances from Nathan's family, subtle, calculating, and critical. His mother's eyes lingered a moment too long on my hands, rough from years of carpentry. His father's jaw tightened slightly as he noticed the modest clothing I wore. They could see me for what I was, humble, grounded, perhaps even inadequate by their standards, but they could not see the quiet power that my gift represented. Later, during a lull in the festivities, a mishap occurred. A guest stumbled near the table where my box rested, brushing against it. The box shifted slightly, revealing the faint outline of its hidden compartment. Emily noticed immediately and knelt to inspect it. "It's different," she murmured, curiosity replacing her earlier indifference. She lifted the lid, revealing the velvet lining. Still she hesitated. Her fingers brushed against the wood, sensing its smooth craftsmanship. I remained silent, watching her intently. Every movement, every hesitation, was a small thread of recognition slowly weaving back into her awareness. She had begun, unconsciously, to understand that this was not merely a gift of wood and velvet. It was a vessel of memory, love, and subtle guidance. Nathan's mother noticed Emily's actions and stepped forward, her expression shifting from polite interest to faint irritation. "Is that the box from your father?" she asked, sharply. "It seems unusual." "Yes," she replied softly. It's special." I smiled quietly, a mixture of pride and patience swelling in my chest. This was the beginning. She was beginning to see, in the smallest gestures, the depth of care that could not be measured in gold or social status. Throughout the evening I observed the cracks forming in the Prestons' impeccable facade. Subtle questions, brief hesitations, and a growing curiosity about the contents of the box signaled that the perfection they prized so highly was not impervious. The hidden compartment, the photograph of Emily as a child, and the letter beneath it were quietly setting the stage for the moment when the truth of years of love and sacrifice would pierce their constructed world. As the music played and guests danced in careful choreography, I remained a quiet sentinel, a father's patience tested but unwavering. I knew that the night's small tremors would grow into something undeniable.
Emily, in her careful brilliance, was about to realize that the value of a gift, the weight of a father's love, could not be measured by money, status, or applause. And when the moment came, when the $500,000 lesson revealed itself, I would stand quietly, watching as the world she had so carefully embraced began to shift, and the truth finally settled where it belonged, in her heart. The morning after the wedding dawned with a silence too heavy to be peaceful. Sunlight filtered through my curtains, catching the dust motes in slow motion, each one drifting like a thought I'd been trying not to have. I sat by my window with a cup of black coffee, watching the snow melt in soft rivulets along the edge of my porch. My hands, rough and weathered, rested around the mug, absorbing its warmth. There was an ache in me that no heat could ease, the kind of ache that only comes from being forgotten by someone you love most. The wedding had ended beautifully, at least for everyone else. For me, it had ended with an empty chair at my table and an emptier feeling in my chest. Emily had smiled for the cameras, posed with her new family, danced with her new husband, but never once did she look for me in the crowd. I might as well have been a ghost wandering among the chandeliers. Yet even ghosts leave traces. I hadn't left the gift there by mistake. I left it because I knew that in time the truth would whisper its way through all that silk and champagne. It always does. 3 days passed before the phone rang. "Dad?" It was Michael's voice, not Emily's. His tone was uncertain, cautious, almost frightened. "Have you got a minute?" I said softly. "Always." There's a bit of a situation," he stammered. "Something about the wedding payments. Mr. Preston's office called, and there's confusion over an invoice. Something about $500,000 that wasn't cleared." I said nothing for a moment. The number rolled around in my mind like a pebble in a stream, smooth, inevitable. He hesitated. "Dad, I think it's connected to you somehow." "Me?" I asked quietly. "How so?" "Well," he said, "the invoice was filed under the name Green Restoration Fund. That's your company name, isn't it, from before you retired?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, it was." "Then why would it show up as part of the wedding account?" Before I could answer, the line clicked. A new call was trying to come through. The caller ID read, "Vanessa Preston, Emily's new mother-in-law." I sighed. "Hold on, Michael. She's calling me. I'll call you right back." When I answered, Vanessa didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Green," she began sharply, "I hope you understand the gravity of what you've done." Her voice trembled with restrained fury, the kind used by people who are used to controlling every situation until they can't. "I'm not sure I do," I said evenly. "You signed an invoice," she snapped, "for the venue restoration, $500,000, and now the management is claiming it was authorized through your old business account. We need that resolved immediately." I let a moment of silence pass before speaking. "Ah, so the restoration clause was triggered." "The what?" "The restoration clause," I repeated calmly, "in the fine print of the property agreement. It states that any event or use of the Preston Estate facilities exceeding a certain occupancy threshold or duration must remit restoration funds to the Green Restoration Trust, established back in 1997. It was a condition built into the land deed when my company did the estate renovations." You're saying the venue was still under your restoration terms?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Yes," I said gently. "You see, when my late wife and I restored the Preston grounds nearly 30 years ago, we agreed on a lifetime maintenance clause. It was a small job then, just woodwork and flooring, but my company retained a legal share of restoration equity for all major events held there. Your family's lawyers must have overlooked it." Silence again. Then, "So the $500,000 to his cost of forgetting where your luxury stands," I finished for her. The call ended without another word. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The quiet satisfaction that filled me wasn't pride, it was something deeper, quieter. Justice, maybe, or balance. That afternoon, Emily called. Her voice was tight, trembling. "Dad, what did you do?" I said softly. "What I always did. I made sure what I built stayed honest." She was quiet for a moment. "They're furious. They said you tricked them." "Did I?" I asked gently. "Or did they trick themselves by thinking I had nothing left to give?" She inhaled shakily. "Dad, that clause, you put it in 30 years ago?" "Yes, for your mother. She loved that estate, called it the most beautiful place she'd ever seen. She said it should always pay something forward for the hands that built it." Everly's voice broke. I didn't know. I didn't think you did. That's why I left the box." "What's in it, Dad?" she whispered. "Everything you've forgotten. A picture, a letter, and the truth about what real wealth means."
That night, the air was thick with the kind of silence that only follows truth. It was almost midnight when my phone buzzed again, a message from Emily. "Dad, can I come by?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "The door's open." Outside, snow was falling again, softly and steadily, blanketing the street in silver light. When I saw her car's headlights pull into the driveway, my heart stuttered the way it always had when she came home late as a teenager. But this time, she wasn't coming home from a party. She was coming back from a mistake. Emily stepped out of the car wearing a long coat, no makeup, her hair pulled back. For the first time in years, she looked like the girl I remembered, the one who used to sit on my workbench, swinging her legs while I carved wood. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, eyes glistening, then rushed forward and hugged me so tightly I felt the years fall away. "Dad, I'm sorry." Her voice cracked, and I could feel the weight of everything she had carried, the pride, the guilt, the confusion. I didn't need to ask what brought her here. I simply held her until her breathing slowed. When we finally sat down in the living room, she placed the small wooden box on the table between us. The brown wrapping paper was torn, the velvet inside now slightly creased. "I opened it," she said quietly, "and I found this." She lifted the photograph, a black and white picture of Helen and me, standing in front of the old house, holding baby Emily in my arms. Helen's smile was wide and effortless, the kind of joy that made everything else in the frame fade away. Emily's fingers trembled as she traced the edge of the photo. "I forgot this existed," she murmured. I nodded slowly. "It was taken the day we finished building that house. Your mother said it was the first place that truly felt like home." She looked at me, eyes wide and wet. "And the letter?" I gestured for her to read it. She unfolded the paper carefully. The creases were yellowed with age, the ink slightly faded, but Helen's handwriting still danced across the page in that elegant looping script she'd always used when writing recipes or birthday cards. Emily began to read aloud, her voice trembling. "To my daughter, and to the woman she will become. When you read this, I may not be here to tell you myself, but I want you to know something important. The world will teach you to chase comfort, wealth, and applause. It will tell you that love is measured in grand gestures and expensive gifts. But real love, the kind that lasts, is built quietly, piece by piece, like the house your father built with his hands. You will grow, and one day you may forget how simple life used to be. You may think your father's hands are too rough, his ways too old, his gifts too small. But remember, every callus, every splinter, every scar on those hands carries the story of how he kept you safe, fed, and loved. If ever you find yourself lost in the glitter of the world, open this box. Remember where you come from.
Remember who built the ground you stand on. With all my love, your mother, Helen." When Emily finished reading, she pressed the paper to her chest and sobbed, not the polite kind of crying she did when others were watching. This was raw, broken, cleansing, the kind of crying that scrubs pride out of the soul. I sat quietly, letting her cry. Some lessons can't be spoken into existence. They have to be felt. When she finally lifted her head, her face was streaked with tears, her voice hoarse. "Dad, I don't deserve you." "Emily," I said softly, "you don't have to deserve love. You just have to remember it." She looked at me for a long moment, then reached across the table and took my hand, the same hand that had built her cribs, patched her school shoes, held her through thunderstorms. "I thought you were embarrassed of me," I continued quietly, "when you didn't introduce me at the wedding, when you avoided my eyes." Her chin quivered. "I was afraid," she said, "afraid that they'd look at you and see where I came from, and I wanted to belong in their world." I nodded slowly. "And now you see what their world costs." She wiped her eyes. "More than money. It cost me you." The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Outside, the snow fell heavier, as though the world itself were trying to erase the noise of all that had gone wrong. After a while, she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "They said you embarrassed them, that the clause you wrote was cruel." I smiled faintly. It wasn't meant to hurt anyone. It was meant to remind them, and maybe you, that every foundation stands on someone's work, and that respect, once forgotten, carries its own debt. She exhaled shakily, nodding. "They're paying it now." I said, "Money comes and goes. What matters is what stays after it's gone." She looked down at the box again. "Mom was right," she murmured. "You gave me a piece of yourself." I chuckled softly. "Your mother always said that's what real gifts are for." She smiled through her tears. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she placed the photograph back inside the box and added something new, her wedding ring. "I think I need to start over. Not leave Nathan, but start seeing what this marriage really means." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "That's all of us can do. Start again, a little wiser each time." We sat together for hours, the fire burning low, the snow thickening outside. No music, no laughter, no champagne, just the quiet sound of two hearts mending. By the time she left, dawn had started to paint the horizon pink. As I watched her drive away, I felt something shift in me. Not closure, but peace. Helen's words had done what I could not. And my daughter, my proud, lost, beautiful girl, was finding her way home. 3 mornings after Emily left my house, the snow had hardened into glittering sheets across the fields. I was in the workshop sanding a piece of walnut when I heard a car door slam outside. The sound echoed sharp in the cold air, followed by hurried footsteps. When I opened the door, Emily stood there again, but this time Nathan was beside her. He looked different from the polished young man I'd met at the wedding. His tailored coat hung open, his hair was untidy, and the expression on his face carried the confusion of a man who had spent several sleepless nights wrestling with truth. "Dad, can we come in?" I stepped aside and gestured toward the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air as I poured 3 mugs and set them on the table. We sat without speaking for a while. The silence was a language of its own. Finally, Nathan cleared his throat. "Mr. Green, I owe you an apology. I didn't understand what that clause meant, what any of it meant. I thought it was some legal trick, but Emily told me about the letter, about her mother." His voice trembled at the edges. "I was raised to think money fixes everything, but that letter, it broke me in ways I didn't expect." I studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Money builds walls, Nathan. Love builds homes. The trick is learning the difference." He gave a small, rueful smile. "I see that now." Emily reached into her bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "It's from my father-in-law, a check for the restoration payment. He said to consider the matter closed." I didn't touch the envelope. "And do you consider it closed?" Her eyes met mine, steady time. "No," she said. "I want to earn back more than money can pay." Nathan looked at her surprised, but she continued before he could speak. "I've been thinking about what Mom wrote, about building something real. I don't want to live in a world where I'm ashamed of the people who made me who I am. I want to help Dad rebuild the old community workshop he talked about. A place where people can learn crafts again, where kids can build with their hands." For a moment I couldn't speak. The words came to me slowly, as if my heart needed time to believe them. "You mean that?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes, Nathan agreed to help. We'll fund it ourselves, not as a show, not for the press, just because it's right." Nathan nodded. "She's right, Mr. Green. I want to be part of that too. My company has all this equipment lying around unused. We could donate it." Something loosened in my chest. It wasn't triumph. It was relief, pure and quiet, like a door finally unlatched after years of strain. I leaned back and looked out the window. The snow was melting again, trickling down the gutters in thin, clear streams. "Your mother used to say that winter always gives back what it takes," I murmured. Maybe she was right. Emily smiled faintly. She was right about a lot of things. We spent the next hour planning the space, the tools, the people we'd invite.
By midsummer, the workshop had a rhythm of its own. Every morning when I opened the big double doors, I could already hear voices coming down the street, the same people who once hurried past one another, now arriving with coffee thermoses and half-finished projects tucked under their arms. There was old Mrs. Carmichael, sanding picture frames for her grandchildren, 2 high school boys who were learning to make guitars, a young mother restoring her grandmother's sewing chest. The sound of saws and laughter spilled out into the street. Some days I would stop, lean on my cane, and just listen. It was the sound of community breathing again. Emily came every weekend. Sometimes she brought Nathan, sometimes their little boy, Samuel. He was a curious child, all questions and energy. "Grandpa, why is wood warm?" he asked me once. I told him, "Because it used to be alive, and some things never forget how to give." He thought about that for a long time, then hugged a block of pine as if it were a kitten. Nathan proved himself too. He fixed what he could, learned what he didn't know, and never once bragged about what he could buy. He'd changed, truly changed. I think humility, once learned honestly, never leaves a man. The Prestons even came one afternoon. Vanessa and her husband, standing awkwardly at the doorway. Emily greeted them, offered coffee, showed them around. They didn't say much, but I saw something softened in their eyes when they watched the kids at the benches. Before leaving, Vanessa turned to me and said quietly, "Mr. Green, you've built something money can't." I just nodded. There was no need for more. In the evenings, when everyone had gone home, I'd sweep the floor, shut off the lights, and sit by the window. The smell of pine and varnish clung to my clothes. I'd look at Helen's photograph, the same one that had once been hidden in that box, and I'd think about how strange and generous time can be. You build a thing once, and years later, it builds you back. One night, Emily came in while I was closing up. She was holding the wooden box. She said, "I wanted this to stay here, so others can see where it started."
We placed it on the shelf by the door, beneath the sign that read, "Built with Hands and Heart." Inside, she had put the photograph, her mother's letter, and a small note of her own. For anyone who forgets that simple things are enough. Now I am old. My hands are slower, my back stiffer, but when I walk into that workshop, I still feel young. The sound of chisels and laughter is a kind of prayer. People come and go, but they always leave something behind, a carving, a story, a lesson learned. That's how I measure wealth now, not in what we keep, but in what we give away that keeps on living. Sometimes, when the late sun turns the windows gold, I imagine Helen sitting beside me, her apron dusty with sawdust, her eyes bright. I tell her about Emily, about Nathan, about Samuel learning to plane wood without fear. I tell her the world finally remembered what she always knew. She smiles in my memory, and I can almost hear her voice. "See, Thomas, even broken hearts can build beautiful things." And I whisper back, "You were right, my love. You always were." It's funny the things that stay with you when the noise of the world finally quiets down. Not the parties or the houses or the checks with too many zeros. No. What lingers are the small sounds, the creak of an old chair, the hush of sawdust falling to the floor, the laughter of people who have forgotten to be ashamed of simplicity. It's been 3 years since the workshop opened. 3 years since that wedding, the one where my daughter, dressed in white silk and surrounded by chandeliers, pretended she didn't know the man who built the chair she sat on. Back then, she thought wealth was her inheritance. Now she knows love is. The irony of life is that the $500,000 bill that came due was never about money. It was the cost of pretense, the price of trying to live above truth. When Emily's lavish reception went unpaid because her father-in-law's business collapsed, all the people she thought would stand by her vanished like mist in the sun. Creditors called. Invitations were rescinded. Even the friends who once adored her elegance stopped answering messages. And in that silence, she heard the echo of her mother's voice. The value of a thing is the love that built it. That's when she came home. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she earned it. By showing up week after week at the workshop, sanding tables, helping strangers, learning again that hands can tell stories words cannot. She paid her debt not in dollars, but in humility. And I, an old man with a weak heart and a strong memory, found peace watching her rebuild her life one plank at a time. The community grew faster than we imagined. A retired banker taught children how to balance a budget. A widowed artist started painting murals on the back walls. Someone donated a piano, and now every Sunday the place fills with music. The city council even gave us a small grant, though I told them no sum could buy what we already had. We framed the letter Helen wrote, yes, the same one from the wooden box, and hung it at the entrance. People stop to read it every day. Some smile, some cry, and a few leave flowers beneath it. It has become our creed, our compass, our quiet reminder that love's craftsmanship never fades. Last month, Emily brought me a newspaper clipping, an article titled "From Shame to Shelter: How a Humble Workshop Rebuilt a Family." She blushed when she handed it to me. She said, "I didn't write it, but I thought you'd want to see it." I looked at the photograph, her, Nathan, little Samuel, and me, standing in front of the workshop doors, smiling like a family that had been rebuilt board by board. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. All I could think was how Helen would have loved that picture. Then I said, "That's worth more than $500,000, don't you think?" Emily laughed through her tears. "Worth more than all the money in the world." I don't know how many more seasons I'll see. The doctor says my heart is steady, but even steady clocks run out of ticks someday. When that day comes, I've asked them to keep my tools right where they are, hanging on the back wall, ready for any hand that needs them. And the wooden box? That will stay on the shelf by the door, open for anyone to place something inside, a photo, a wish, a piece of their story. Because that's what the box was always meant to be, not a gift, but a vessel, a place where love collects, grows, and remembers. So if you ever walk by Maple Street on a quiet afternoon and hear the hum of saws and laughter, step inside. You'll see what I mean. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand what my Helen meant when she said, "Luxury fades, but love is the only thing that never goes out of style." The end.